Hey guys, this is Post-Production Pi and welcome to the ultimate lomography video tutorial. In this tutorial we're actually going to teach you guys how to take any digital photograph from any camera and turn it into a really great looking Lomo style photograph. Now for those of you that haven't heard or seen Lomo cameras, let's pull up lomography.com. It's probably the best place to get Lomo cameras and the color slide film and all the accessories and stuff like that. And this is a great plug for them. They actually did not sponsor this video, so that's a little freebie for them. Now, these are by no means considered high quality cameras when you compare them to like a modern DSLR, but that's kind of the point. It's what makes these cameras so endearing. These lo-fi or toy cameras such as Olga's, Diana's, Lomo cameras, they create some really cool looking images, and in particular when the actual film is cross-processed. And like we talked about before, if you guys actually click on film right here, it'll take you to this page. Cross-processing is basically when you take film that's meant for one type of processing chemical and you process it in another type of chemical. So what you typically do is you shoot with color slide film on your Lomo camera, and then you take that and you have your lab process it as regular 35mm film, which is what creates those crazy looking colors. Now, particularly in recent years, that kind of style of color and that lo-fi look has become really popular. And I've seen a few written tutorials as well as some video tutorials on how to create a Lomo effect, but in comparing them to actual Lomo images, they seem to leave a lot of things out. So we're going to take a glance at some actual Lomo photographs by scrolling to the bottom of this page. And then we're going to teach you guys basically how ground up from in Photoshop how to recreate these effects and create like a really good looking replica Lomo photograph. Alright, so let's take a look at some of these and kind of identify the distinct features that make these a Lomo photograph. So I'm just going to pull up this second image right here. And one of the things that we notice first of all is just the colors. The cross-processing has really amplified the saturation of the image, and we also see kind of some color shifts going on. So like in the previous tutorial when we talked about the blues being pulled out of the highlights during cross-processing, that's exactly what's happened here. So in the highlights we see less blue and more green. When we get to the shadows we see more blues. The reds in the highlights have been amplified, greens in the highlights have been amplified, so we see a lot more red and green, and less in kind of the shadowy areas. And just overall saturation really pops. Another thing that we notice is basically the highlights. So you can see in this image, we'll pull out some other ones as well, but look in this image how basically a lot of these highlights have become blown during processing. And the shadows have actually become clipped as well, meaning they've dropped to a complete black. They're really, really strong shadows. Let's pull up a different image and see. Same thing in this image. We see a lot of basically reds in the highlights, and then not so much blue in the highlights. We see a little bit of blue down here in the shadowy area. Some crazy highlights overall, blown highlights with some really deep shadows. So that's kind of one of the first and most distinct things that we see on these images. The shadows, the highlights, the cross-processing overall, and the colors. Next, on every one of these images, there's a really heavy vignette, which we can pretty much see around every one of these. And the vignetting isn't actually super consistent across the frame, meaning that when we actually go and create our vignette, we don't have to be super careful about creating a perfect vignette that is all equal in all four corners. The next thing I wanted to bring up is the amount of grain. Each one of these images is actually going to have quite a bit of grain from the shadows all the way through the highlights. It's just a natural byproduct of shooting on this type of film. And the last thing I want to bring up is basically the clarity. We can see that in all these images, these cameras have a very strong sharpness sweet spot in the center, and it fades off very quickly to become quite blurry around the edges. So we need to make sure that we replicate that look when we go and we create this look in Photoshop. Alright, so a quick review of what we need to do in Photoshop to get this look. And this isn't exactly in the order that we're going to do them in, but we need to cross-process our colors, exaggerate the saturation, also exaggerate the highlights so that they're blown, as well as the shadows so that they're clipped, apply heavy vignetting, film grain, increase sharpness in the center, and blur towards the edges. Alright guys, let's go to the next tutorial, open up Photoshop, and get started.